let's kick off this December edition of Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble. I want to welcome everyone to call. Thank you so much for being here. This is a series of calls that TRAK hosts called Beyond the Boat, where we offer a series of calls to help build competence and confidence on the water, with the result of helping you live more of a life unleashed. To support your kayaking progression and connecting with water and learning from others. And collectively, our community has a place to eddy out, if you will, and plug in on these Zoom calls and share ideas and concept with like-minded paddlers. So today is the Keys to Avoiding Deep Trouble call. We're super excited about this. We are on Zoom, so I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. But first, I just want to let you know that what you're in store for today is super fantastic. We are focusing on a conversation around solo kayaking expeditions with a focus on a valuable risk management framework to help you make more effective decisions and enable you to travel in places either as a team or solo that otherwise might be deemed unacceptable. So let's move into that. First of all, with my name is Hans. I am a longtime paddler and outdoor educator and the director of development with TRAK Kayaks. I'm hailing from the wild, wet West Coast on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And in this series of Beyond the Boat, we're going to try to capture this live and get a clean recording of it. So we are going to keep most folks muted, and we welcome your conversations, your input, and your questions in the chat box. So if you're new to Zoom, you can go to the control panel, you'll see chat, you can open that up. We invite everyone to plug into that and to offer questions or thoughts or additions to our conversation here today. And then at the end, we're going to open this call up for more of a hangout and a community gathering. So if there is something that's valuable that you'd like to contribute or a burning question we're not answering, also feel free to raise your hand and we'll just open up the mic and bring you in for that. So that's a little bit about the Zoom platform here. And let's get this ball rolling then. And so first of all, I want to introduce our special guest. Matt Pruis is he's a sponsored track paddler with TRAK Kayaks. He's a longtime track pilot. He's a long distance solo expeditionary paddler. He's a SAR technician. He's an engineer in the aerospace industry. He's a father and a husband and somebody who really lives the spirit of adventure. And so without any hesitation, I'd like to welcome Matt Pruis to the call. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thank you, Hans. That's quite an introduction, and I really appreciate it coming from you with your extensive background and just your passion for reaching out to people and pushing us all to kind of enjoy life. So thank you for the introduction.
Terrific. You're welcome. Let's unpack a little bit about what's going on for you. Give us some context. What's your I know you're paddling almost all the time. What was your last paddle trip?
Last paddle trip. So, I moved out to Virginia, so we live on a little lake. So I do get to paddle quite frequently, just right out my back door, which is nice. But with COVID, we're not paddling quite as much, with big trips. I did just go down with the family to the Everglades. So that was a week-long trip that with some extended family, and we had a great time there. Pretty low key, but really enjoyable. I actually had a long distance paddle race recently, which I DNF'd. I did not finish the Alabama 650. So we can talk about my rationale there. But earlier in the year, I did a couple 100-mile race in South Carolina. Right, that was kind of timing around right when COVID was cutting in. So yeah. We've been, I've been trying to get my longer distance paddles in, as well as just enjoying paddling with the family as much as possible.
Terrific, fantastic. So what's in the lineup for you? What do you imagine on the horizon for you in terms of your next paddling trip?
I think, like a lot of paddlers, I imagine what was in my lineup for this year is still in there. I think we're all, enjoying, reading and kind of thinking about more and more trips. I have a couple that, I've had on the books for years that I've really wanted to do. When I first did the race to Alaska the first time, many, many years ago, as I did that research, I found a First Nations portage route up in northern BC. I'd still love to get up there. So that's the Qual-Extol region. I'd love to go ahead and get up there and get into that. We had put it on the books for this year, but Canada very smartly is not letting us Americans in. So that's not going to happen. I got some old places in, the North Channel, Lake Huron that I want to get to. Got Maine, coastline. I've got some ideas. Hopefully this year it will line up and we'll be able to get a few of them ticked off.
Fantastic, terrific. I've lived and sailed along that Maine coastline. A fantastic destination. Love to chat with you about. Tell us a little about some of the other gigs. What's what helps make all this possible for you?
You mean my actual job, the thing that pays the salary. So actually
that one.
So I work for an aerospace company, and what we actually do. So I'm an engineer, and I actually work. Now everybody works 100% remote, but my job is actually to help basically foreign nation AirSat navigation service providers to use our service for our company, which I now work for. My background, just so everybody knows, is I was a research scientist for many years, for 20+ years, for a little research company. I have a doctorate in oceanography, and now I do aerospace. So that's the migration. But what we really do is we install a whole array of satellites with Iridium, and we now have the capability to track every airplane around the globe. And so we provide that service to folks that want to know, including, because I'll just tie this in for us, Hans, including search and rescue. So now we have what's called an alert system, where if an aircraft goes down, search and rescue anywhere in the world can call us up, and we'll give them the precise location of those downed aircraft.
Okay, terrific. Yeah. So it sounds like you're dealing with sort of high-speed risk management scenarios all the time. and so I think a lot of us use like the Garmin InReach device. Is your sort of work associated with that project?
No, so every aircraft, so this, as far as aircraft go, every aircraft is now in the United States, all of them are squidding out their position to be received by sensors. What we did is we flipped it. Instead of putting ground-based sensors, we put them up in the sky. And so by doing that, it's using the GPS technology to locate the aircraft, but the aircraft is sending out that through this system we've already had in place in the United States and around the world to track aircraft.
Okay. Terrific. So in many ways let's get back to what we're talking about here, which is the importance of really risk management and decision making that you might use in a group. How do we apply those strategies and techniques into solo paddling to help us live more of a life unleashed, if you will, and independently get out there? And maybe that's really relevant in this time of COVID when we're more often paddling solo. So let's talk about, first of all, with regard to paddling solo or pushing your comfort zones and getting into higher degrees of risk. What's the problem that we're often dealing with?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that we have when we address kind of this risk management issue, or the first thing we try and address, is really to get an understanding of what the risks are and how we fit into that realm. Mm-hmm. So how do we fit in our situation, whether that be solo or with a team? So I think getting a framework so that everybody has, or that people have an ability to kind of make that assessment of where they stand and just kind of step through a process. That process can be used to therefore allow them to expand their comfort zone, understand what their problems are, and kind of, to me, the biggest thing is to see the risk, be able to make an assessment, and then be able to still continue to explore, continue to get out, continue to enjoy an adventure. It's not about, managing risk isn't about avoiding risk. It's about enabling you to to move into those realms and continue to enjoy your life.
Terrific. I love that. So here's what I'm getting. So because the sea is so dynamic and ever changing, it sounds like we can get into situations that are hazardous and we can get into trouble really fast, especially if we're in a loaded kayak or with a group with a variety of skill sets. And it can really keep us from going out and sometimes limit our opportunities to move through hazardous situations to reach safety. Which can really help, lead us to getting into trouble and create a hesitation that can lead to dire consequences. So what I'm hearing is it doesn't really have to be that way. Is that sometimes you need to move through real hazardous situations to reach safety that allows us to be able to, if we have a framework like that, then we can really push our limits and feel more empowered to actually live the life of adventure that we want to.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, I remember when we first met at the Tofino Surf Camp years ago. You and Fabio gave a great presentation on risk management, I thought, and I also thought that it was interesting to me at the time because I had joined search and rescue, and we go through routine training in search and rescue, and I thought it was interesting to see how your framework kind of resonated in with the team framework that's involved with search and rescue as you move out into the field. So I really thought that was a neat kind of confluence there.
Great, fantastic. I'll give folks just a little bit of a touch point on that. Matt's referencing track pilot Fabio, and if you're on this program, you should be able to check out past episodes. I invite you to go look at an episode we did with Fabio on risk management as well, and there's some interesting elements there. So it sounds like the big idea here and the overall goal of this call, Matt, is that if we can implement and understand this framework, it helps us to create the opportunity to exercise that spirit of adventure through more effective decision-making processes and having a way to systematize constant hazard evaluation in a way that allows us to not be so conservative in a limiting way.
Yeah. So I guess to keep jumping on that search and rescue kind of perspective there, I'll pull out a little card they give you, or not everybody, but the teams I've been involved with for search and rescue. So it's called the SARGAR card. So the green, amber, red, and you have a checklist that you go through with your team. And so as you move through your checklist, you can go ahead and gain an understanding. With a search and rescue team, every person on the team is responsible for responding for whether they think this is a red, amber, or green as we move through. And that's a really powerful thing because everybody has a voice and gets to express that voice.
Love it. Fantastic. Okay. That's super cool that you bring that in. Two things I love about that is one is it sounds like you're really empowering people to have active followership, active peer leadership, and active self-leadership, so that everyone's not relying on either a designated leadership role or an assumed leadership role. Sounds like that's one of the key pieces of this.
Yeah, I think, and I think the key that you're kind of bringing out there, teasing out, is this role of supervision of who's in charge, and like you said, in a team of kayakers, particularly high skilled kayakers, a lot of decisions sometimes are made jointly, but it is important to understand who's in charge or who's following different things, because the biggest problem, and I'll talk about search and rescue, the biggest problem, if there's an avalanche, if there's more than one person in the avalanche, it's a highly skilled group that's out there. Most likely it's snowmobilers, because snowmobilers tend to congregate. They have the most equipment. So if there's a large number of people that are caught in an avalanche, it's almost always highly skilled. When it's down to singles, that's where we have kind of that mixed. We either have highly skilled that understood risk and moved away, or we have frankly inexperienced people is usually how it happens. And so the more experience you have doesn't take away this importance of supervision and having control.
Terrific, fantastic. I love that. So I'm going to provide in the chat room here a a tool that's very similar to the Sargar card, if you will. Yeah, this one's specific for paddlers. This is the decision-making triangle that TRAK has developed in issues as a simple framework that you can use. And so what I'm understanding is that if you're on a team of paddlers, then one of the most essential things that you have the same methodology in which these decisions are made. So you have a common ground on that, and you can always lean on that, and you can reference it in a much more succinct fashion to make decision-making more efficient and effective.
Yeah, so I think as a team to have the same framework works. And I also think that if you develop a framework to continue to use that as an individual, it's very important too. So it works as a team. It also is really important as an individual. So, as you know, Hans, I like to do a lot of solo paddling. And so, but I still keep the same frameworks in mind. I still go through these same checklists. And by doing that, keeping that framework in, it allows me to make rapid decisions, quick decisions, which, as you talked about earlier, can enable you to get out of a situation that's hazardous, make a decision to move through a situation that's hazardous, or pull out and eddy out and take your time and decide what your next steps are.
Terrific, fantastic. So before we unpack this really critical framework that you're going to introduce today, let's give people a point of reference, if you will, on the scope of, you say you love to solo paddle. Let's give people a reference of that. Maybe let me just pull one example. You've done the Race to Alaska, a solo human-powered race multiple times on the Pacific Northwest coast. Some of that is outer coast region. Give us a sense of how many miles that is, what the exposure is like, and what a typical day might be like.
Yeah, so it's not a human-powered race. You can sail it, and so it's usually sailed. And so that's the important thing. There's no motors involved, but you can sail it. And so most of the folks that are in the Race to Alaska are going to go ahead and sail it. So it starts in Port Townsend, Washington, crosses the Straits of Juan de Fuca up to Victoria, and then these days you have the choice to go inside or outside of Vancouver Island. But when I've done it, it's the route was inside, and so you took the inside passage up Vancouver Island and your way up to Ketchikan, Alaska. So that part of the race there is in total about, I think it's 700, I think they say 750, but I think it's 710 miles of distance that you have to cover. So I've done it twice. And I've done it human powered both times.
Terrific. Fantastic. And how many days would you typically paddle that, or how many days of exposure are we talking about?
Well, so exposure is a variable term there. So I'll be careful. So it took me a little over 18 days both times that I paddled it. So that's the kind of framework. When you're down south, you actually, there is quite a ways, places to get out if you needed to. As you know, Hans, as you move north of Vancouver Island, it gets fairly remote at that point. There's not much, not many places to reprovision or catch supplies or get any kind of rest as you move up there.
Great. I think that's good context. So the scope of a type of event you're talking about, 18 days in the water, completely self-support, and as it progresses, you're increasingly more remote. Terrific. Okay. Fantastic. Well, for folks that are interested in learning more about that, you can check out the Race to Alaska, and on the TRAK blog, maybe Curtis could put this in the chat room, is we did a blog post on Matt's race, I believe. And I know that Matt also issued dispatches from the field, which were audio sound bites of his expedition. Very, very compelling to listen to kind of track his decision-making along that race and what he was experiencing. So I invite people to check that out. So before we dive into this framework, exactly, Matt, I'd love just to acknowledge some people on this call. Cole is back from a work stint. He's back on Vancouver Island. He's a longtime TRAK pilot. He runs, not only has hosted this call or one of our other calls, but also is one of the coaches in our Skills Accelerator program, and a level 3 pilot who works with us on some of our skills camps. Welcome to the call, Cole. Like to acknowledge Jason Gwendon, who's most of you have talked to if you're in the track community, and is a product guru and team leader. Want to acknowledge Curtis at HQ. He is also kind of the lead of customer support at TRAK HQ, and he's monitoring this chat as well as helping to facilitate our conversation here. Other folks on the call that I'm noticing, we got looks like we got Peter on board from Europe with a glass of wine in his hand. Great to see you, Peter. And we got a new track pilot on the call here from the Caribbean. Weston Moses is joining us today for the first time. Welcome, Wes. And we've got Siri on the line, who's a track pilot from Switzerland. And yeah, so thanks all of you guys for joining us. Really great to see this community, and appreciate you engaging in this conversation. The Race to Alaska link is in the chat box, but let's move on, Matt, and let's unpack this framework that you use for risk management that is really kind of in its origins designed for team management, but you really apply this as a solo paddler to help ensure safety and effective decision making on the water. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll just point out, since we went ahead with some introductions, that Ian Graham's on the line too, who posted up the R2AK link and is a virtual legend in Race to Alaska and human powered Race to Alaska and sailing. So thanks for hopping on, Ian.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. So exactly like you said, Hans, this is really a framework that I've put in, and I just kind of work through it every time that I'm working. In particular, I would, like a team would, in the morning before I head out, I go through these kind of steps in my head, and then I have to continually update as conditions change, as I get new information all throughout the day. But I continue that same process in my head as we go through. So to me, the structure is really helpful to make decisions.
Great, awesome. So let's dive into it. What's the first step?
Well, we actually talked about it a little bit already, and for search and rescue, the first thing that you have to red, amber, green is this idea of supervision, and really it's that idea of chain of command and understanding how this is going to flow down. So for a team like that, it's really important that you have leaders designated along the way, and you have a good understanding where decisions are made. As an individual, it's the same framework, but what you want to do is look at yourself and have an understanding of yourself and the conditions you're going to go into. So is the supervision, is the decision-making background adequate as we move forward into this situation, or how would you rate it? If you're in an area that you know really well, you've been in before, you've got the experience, you're ready to go. If you're moving into an area that you're not as familiar with, that you don't have that knowledge or that skill base, or maybe it's the environment, maybe you're not very good in the surf zone, and you're going to go through the surf zone. So it's those decisions that play in to decide where you feel about that kind of guidance. Okay,
so the first step is to really look at supervision and both objectively and subjectively. Okay,
yeah, I think
great.
So. I guess I'll just keep going there. As far as our checklist, I should probably look at it, but I guess I have it in front of me. But the next thing you're really going to do is talk about planning, and you're going to do that you're going to do that as a group, or you're going to do it as an individual. And so that's to look out where you're headed that day. And so I'll use, each day, if you're going to go out on an 18-day expedition, if you're solo, every day you need to set up what your plans are for that day. And those plans are going to vary or should have several escape valves throughout it, and an understanding of where those escape valves are, because if you're going to travel a 12, 14 plus hour day in a boat, you're going to need to know that the conditions that you have now are going to be vastly different. Even the weather report that you get now is going to vary over that day, and you're going to need to keep up with that. So you got to think about the planning. What do you have there, and how complex is it? You know, how many areas are you going to move around that are different from the one you're experiencing here? And so if you go 50, 60 miles in a day, the environment is changing as well, that you're likely going to be moving through.
Right. In the race to Alaska, how many miles would you typically paddle in a day?
Yeah, so it varies quite a bit. So to do the 18 days kind of paddling, that ends up only being about 40 miles a day on average. But some days you're not actually on the water. So the first year I wasn't on the water for those days because there was gales, and I had made a decision that year, if the weather was a gale, I was just going to rest that day. The second year was with the TRAK Kayak, was the year that I did that. So the mileage there is a little bit skewed, Hans, because Ian probably knows this, and I can't see if anyone else in the race to Alaska's on, but I have the record for the most miles in the wrong direction. And so for the race to Alaska that year, I took the TRAK Kayak because I had made a goal that year of actually doing some portages, of doing some things that kind of moved me from a realm that I felt really comfortable to kind of keep allowing me to grow and move through some environments that I really wouldn't be able to predict. Yeah. And so I went ahead and did that. And that put me a lot of miles up in one area. And I had a failed attempt of portaging through an area. I got in, it was much too difficult to make it through without completely exhausting my reserves. And my food supply was such that I had to make a call. Do I keep going forward, or do I turn around and go back? And I turned around and went back.
And so that was part of the planning piece, the constant evaluation of is there time and resources to complete on that decision. So, you know, one thing that I was always inspired by is I saw Matt a couple of times on this race to Alaska. And first I was amazed that here's a TRAK kayak loaded with 18 days of food, you know, at minimal rations, and basically the kind of outerwear and clothing you need to be warm and dry in the Pacific Northwest, and portage gear, which included like a set of wheels and a framework to actually roll his kayak through the BC bush. You probably get the award for like the most loaded and the most range one could ever get out of a 16-foot kayak. So let's bring this back into the framework. So step one, really supervision, assessing for adequate decision-making and identifying evaluation backstops, both subjectively and objectively. The second step is really related to the planning phase. Does everyone on the team understand the plan? Where are the decision points? Where are the time and, you know, are there time and resources to complete, and what those turnarounds might be on different segments, like you're illustrating in the portage and the race to Alaska? And where are the escape valves for both subjective and objective eventualities? Let's move on to the third step.
Yeah, so generally this is where you start to evaluate fitness. So for a team, that's fitness, mental and physical, for the entire team. You know, and I'll keep drawing back and forth because this framework comes out of search and rescue. So there can be a lot of interplay there between physical and mental, and a team can have a lot of diversity. And the mental aspects, you know, if anybody's, you know, if you've done a long trip, there can be lots of things going on. For there, it actually can be the situation you're going into. Search and rescue is not always about rescuing the people. Sometimes it's about bringing them home for other family members and for closure. And so there's a huge mental aspect there. When you're solo kayaking, I'll say, when you start out a trip like that, at 18-day, 14-day, any kind of long solo trip, when you start out, you're focused, your mind's good, you're moving on. And as you move through those days, I'll say that you become emotionally more and more raw. And so that mental aspect is really important to understand where you're at as well. And that rawness is not something you should be afraid of. That rawness is something to bring you more close to, I think, you know, who we are as people as we tear away all these distractions and just get to enjoy who we are and personal connections. But it's really important to be able to evaluate both of those. So how's your fitness and how's your mental state? And that's one of the things that as you go through a day that I said you have to keep evaluating. You're obviously going to have to keep evaluating that one.
And let me ask you this question, Matt, how do you evaluate your mental status at any one point? I get that it's really dynamic. What are some of the, I guess, tactics that you use to assess your, mental state at any one moment?
Yeah, and so the risks with the mental state is whether or not you're going to make those good decisions and be prepared to make those good decisions.
Okay, so it's almost an evaluation of just your judgment and decision making.
Yeah, I think you have to accept it. Well, as a solo, you have to accept who you are and what your state is, and enjoy and move through those. But you do have to make sure that you can make good decisions, because and that you're ready to make those decisions, so that you're not distracted, you're not allowing other things in, that you're able to be present and make those decisions.
Great. Okay, so fitness, mental and physical check. What's the next thing you're evaluating?
Well, we got into those things that are continually changing, and the next one's probably going to be the environment. So I think you refer to it as the objective scenario evaluation, but what's your environment and what's your hazards? And so we all know as longer distance paddlers that you're going to pay close attention to what the environment is, and that's both the sea state, that's the weather, and how it's going to change over the course of the day. So we all pay as much attention to that as we can, and begin to learn and grow and kind of refine our ability to make the assessments of what we should, how we can evaluate weather that we're in and what it means. But you always have to, we all know that the sea's going to kick our ass, and it's going to happen when we don't expect it. And so we need to be cognizant of what's going on and watching and paying attention, and evaluating that and what it means for the equipment that we have, for what we have available to us to move in there. We have to put those factors into play too, and make sure that we're ready to handle those.
I love how, the objective scenario you're putting in here, this is the most obvious one, right? And we're talking about this now being like number 4th on the list. It's often where people start. And so I want to put that into the context of that framework. Really great place for it to live. And I think that, what are the pitfalls here? I know that the objective scenario evaluation is the one that's most often in your face, but what are some tips that you could offer the solo paddler or even the team leader around assessing that objective hazard?
Yeah, I really think that there's a lot to experience in living through different scenarios and situations that comes into play when it comes to this. And that I think all of us who have done things have made decisions and found 6 miles into a 12-mile crossing that we should have waited. Because I'll think of one of my race to Alaska's, that 6 out of a 12-mile crossing came to my mind because I made a decision. I'd had bad weather all day long, the weather calmed down, and I had a 12-mile crossing sitting there, and I thought, this is a perfect time to do the crossing. Except that I knew the tides were wrong, and that the tides would be an issue, but I was like, it's perfect time. I also knew my weather forecast. It was bad. It was supposed to stay bad through this whole period. Mm-hmm. I knew that, and I made the decision to go, and 6 miles out, I got my butt kicked. I mean, it was fine. There was no serious hazard. It just took a long time to continue out, much longer than it should have to continue that last 6 miles. And that's where, some of that uncertainty comes into play. I should have known that little calm down was just a little calm down. I should have made those decisions, but we all kind of push out sometimes and vary. So.
Terrific. Okay, I get that. One of the things from a skills progression perspective that we always teach on any of our camps and tours is that not only do you need to be able to have the skill, but having experience for that skill in those conditions is what makes it really kind of a workable tool for you. So sure, if you can do a cowboy style reentry into your kayak in calm, flat water, that's not the same as applying that in force 5 conditions or greater. And so it's really important for us to be, have that context when we're evaluating, seems like objective scenarios is, and the environment is, do we actually have, experience in those exact conditions to actually be able to make that call?
Yeah, and I think, it's one of the joys of going out with very new kayakers and to get them out into the paddling sport, because the progression of fear and uncertainty of white knuckle paddling to fairly comfortable paddling happens really pretty rapidly. And probably the most dangerous point is at that point, because they've went through that. I'm afraid of the scenarios that are out here. I'm not sure what I can do, to thinking that they're pretty comfortable, and it makes it so that they naturally make a decision that might push them into conditions that they're actually not ready for. So I think there's that first stage, which is, by the way, it's so fun to watch people, go from not feeling comfortable at all to feeling very comfortable in the boat. But what they need after that is real experience and real time in different conditions. Not all of it extreme, but different conditions to kind of grow and become better at making decisions.
Fantastic. I love that one. In our last episode of 3 Steps to Kayaking, we unpacked the 4 stages of learning. We talked about unconscious incompetence and that progression to conscious incompetence, to conscious competence, to all the way to total fluency and mastery, where the unconscious competence comes in. So let's move on. So we've covered the points of supervision, planning, fitness, and now the objective scenario. What's next on your checklist?
Yeah, and believe it or not, then it gets down to in sour terms, the team. Because you're going to have, now you understand the mission, you understand the environment, you understand all these things. Now you got to evaluate your team. There's obviously, needs for navigation, there's needs for medical, and not any person on the team needs to be everything. You bring the team members, look for who's best in those different things and put them into leadership roles there. Mm-hmm. When you're solo, when you evaluate your team, it's a team of one. And so you have the skills that you have, but what you need to do is to, as we talked about there, is to not, over project your skills in some areas and to understand what your skills really are. And so, you have to know what you can do medically for your own self and have the kit prepared to do that. But you don't, the reality is there's no reason to bring medical supplies that you can't even possibly use because you don't have the skill set and you're alone and it's you. So you need to make those evaluations of what really makes sense. You need to understand your navigational skills and put that into play. Because to me, one of the great joys of long distance paddling is those navigational choices that you have as the conditions change around you. How do you navigate through these different areas? Can you make route changes that you didn't think about previously, and can you do that in a dynamic environment to make good decisions?
Fantastic. I love this idea of constituting yourself as a team and understanding sort of the skills that you have as the contributing members. And what's going through my mind with this is the understanding of like, oh, I've got that skill, but do I have that skill in the context of also applying this skill and that skill, and to bring it into first aid, it's like, oh yeah, I can stop the bleeding, but I can't stop the bleeding and manage the C-spine at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So what's next as you think about this progression?
Yeah, and so generally the last thing, a team will go through is a level of complexity and evaluation where a lot of times the SAR teams I've been involved with will talk about it as improvisation versus planned. And the reason is sometimes when you go through all of this, you figured out what it is that you're going to do for that day. There's a whole lot of area that you really don't know. You don't really know the details very well. And then there are other scenarios where you actually know them quite well. And so if you can break it out there, you can have a last bit of catch that can understand the things that you don't know. And so, and I think that, it's really important as a team to make that assessment too, because for teams in particular, if you're going into a day where you don't know a lot of the details, you kind of know the big plan, you know where you're going, but you don't know a lot of the details. You don't, in a paddling sense, you don't know what's around that head. You don't know what the conditions are. You don't know the currents in an area. So you're going to have to adjust to those. So by making a statement early on about where you are with your knowledge there, it really helps you kind of know how to make decisions as you go through the day.
I love that. So it really puts into context really what you do know. It gives it some sort of like a data point by simply acknowledging and recognizing, hey, here's what we know. This is what we're making our decision on. But what don't we know that are the set of variables that may also be contributing to the scenario, just so you can get a sense of what that scope is. Terrific. What's an example, if you will, of a way in which you have where the complexity evaluation has basically been the backstop for you, where it was the call or not to go?
I think, I always think it's hard to do the backstop thing, Hans, because I think a lot of times, it's the bigger picture that comes into play. But I think maybe that portage we were talking about earlier that I ended up pulling out on, I'd made it 3 miles in. I literally had a half a mile to go in order to get back in the water. But conditions had been okay, and now they were getting substantially worse. And that would have put me into some territory that I've never been, I had no experience in. And as I moved forward with that, super high tides, and I as I stood there making that decision, the problem was if I push forward, do I know all the details that will enable me to make it out and make it to where I need to be, given where I was. And the decision was hard, but I made the decision to turn around, go back over 3 miles of rough terrain to put myself in the water, to then manage to make a record for going the most miles in the wrong direction in a race. But that was a choice between, I knew exactly how long my backtracking would take me. I knew how to move through that territory versus going forward where there were a lot of unknowns. And it probably haunt me forever. Was that the right choice? I don't know. I mean, the right choice, and I'm safe in that, but I did want to go forward. So it's those funny things where you make those decisions, and everybody thinks there's one right decision, or a lot of people think there's one right decision, but there's certainly not in the world of being out and adventuring. There are multiple decisions that can be made that will have different outcomes, but all may be good or acceptable. So
this is so powerful. This I think one of the things that this really helps to address is the momentum or inertia that a team or an individual may actually have that can also carry us into into situations that have results we don't want. And a very incredible teaching story there about simply because the conditions of what you did know were changing so fast that it expanded the list of variables of what you don't know, to the extent that instead of pushing through just a short little half mile of unknowns into into something that was a greater unknown, you basically, sucked it up and went back 3 miles of BC bushwhack, dragging a boat back through to get into some degree of protection water that you could eventually go on. So really powerful story there. So, whether it was a right decision or not, it's a very successful experience that allows you to teach a very powerful teaching story. Yeah, thanks so much. Peter's put a little note in here, is that Shackleton turned back 100 miles from being the first to the South Pole. It's not unlike that Shackleton story. And whether it was a right decision or not, he came back with everybody on the expedition alive. His leadership continues to be a guide for all of us that venture into the outdoors with a team and accept that responsibility. So tremendous, great. So after complexity, then what happens?
Well, at this point, we've kind of hit our list. So we should have evaluated everything on this list. But the important part is we've kind of talked about is to continue to evaluate as we continue to go through the day. But I just want to point out, we in your decision-making triage that you put up, there's red, yellow, and green, and I talk about GAR, so green, amber, and red. But one thing to realize is that a red does not actually mean stop. So in search and rescue in particular, you can go through your entire evaluation as a team and have most, potentially even all, red. Mm-hmm. The team should make decisions or talk about trying to mitigate any of those risks if they can. But the reality is, for search and rescue, you as a team are going out to potentially save a life or lives. And so the team has to make a decision about whether to go or not. So going through this and making those assessments still means you have to make the decision of where you're going to go. Individually, I would hope that you don't get through there and they're all red and you decide to go because you're an adventurer. That's not good decision making. But as adventurers too, as we go out and explore things and push ourselves a little bit, sometimes something in there will be red and we'll make a decision to go. And sometimes that decision to go is because we're going from an area that has got a stretch of dangerous water or problem, and we're going to move out through that. So once we make it past that, then conditions will be better. There can be lots of reasons why, but red doesn't necessarily mean don't go. It just means you have to acknowledge that. And if you can mitigate it, but just acknowledge it and then make your decision.
Fantastic. So sometimes it sounds like, one has to move through what might otherwise seem like an unacceptable risk to get to a greater degree of safety. Yeah. And it sounds like if we put all this together, in conclusion, really, that our ability to make quick decisions quickly and effectively is one of the most effective safety measures that we have in challenging situations.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think, a lot of times the biggest risk factor is actually indecision, and that, the successfully take those risks to take your situation and then be able to execute can frequently enable you to get out of the situation that's hazardous, or retreat from that situation. But if you're spending too much time making those decisions, then the problem becomes that you're in that hazardous situation in that time, and conditions may be getting worse as you're dealing with that.
Cool. So you're saying it sounds like doors can close quickly. Even once a commitment's been made, that door can be closing. And if you're always in this evaluative state, then you're aware of that. I notice a lot of teams, they'll make a decision and then they stop evaluating and then they just move in with we've committed now, we've done the hard part, let's do it. And the evaluation period will be suspended.
Yeah, and I think one of the big problems with skilled teams that are together, and paddling is one of the perfect examples of this, is we hit the water, we're all in conditions that we feel comfortable with, but then something can happen. And our problem is that we haven't defined a leadership structure We haven't defined a plan. We haven't worked together as a team to make those decisions. And so when that happens, the team is fractured. And things can, like I said, it's a lot of times it's the highly skilled that are the ones that are in need of search and rescue.
Fantastic. That's a great example. And I love, Matt, how you bring that in, because, if you're using a framework like this, if you're using this framework to make breakfast, and you're using this framework to put the tent away, and you're using this framework to pack your boats, then when you really need it, it's totally fluent.
Yeah, and like I said, the great thing, is I think back to the Tofina experience and Fabio and your presentation on that as well, was the idea, to me, kind of resonated in that we really just need to do that in all these circumstances. And it was funny because a lot of times I at that time, I wasn't really always thinking about it that way. I had this search and rescue thing, and I thought, in those environments, we really need to do this. And I thought about it as solo. I also have a framework that I go through constantly, but I thought it was a perfect example of highly skilled people together, still, or even more so, needing to make those decisions, because sometimes they're in even more hazardous situations.
Love it. Fantastic. Yeah, this has been really a compelling conversation. I really appreciate it, Matt. I love that mindset that, this can actually open up greater areas to us, and that it's okay maybe to move past some of those conservative frameworks and to blow the decision-making triangle out of the water, but that you're actually doing it. With the mindset that sometimes a less conservative call is a better decision for an overall positive result.
Yeah, I think, we're all adventurers. So we want to explore and have that framework that allows us to continue to do that. So to make the right decisions and to keep growing and expanding.
I'm going to offer to this community here just also a link to another simple tool that TRAK has produced, is just a simple passage plan to help articulate and bring those things both subjectively and objectively to the table as part of the conversation. So what we've really covered today is this ongoing evaluative framework, where the first thing we're addressing is the supervision, next the planning, then the fitness, then the objective scenario, then the team membership, and then complexity evaluation, and then repeat. And to manage this and to keep this going, it sounds like is the critical aspect. And the more that we can use this tool consistently in the team, the more fluency there's going to be around it, and the quicker we're going to be able to make those decisions. So the single biggest skill set here for safety that really expands our, the window or to terrain or the events in which we can actually participate in, is the fast decision making. And this tool ultimately leads to that. Fast and effective decision making is the single biggest, like we said before, measure of safety in challenging situations. So I want to just invite people, if they have any questions for you, to visit the chat or to raise your hand, and love to field those now. And let's bring this into any scenario. I'd love for folks that are on, if you don't have a question and you want to just comment in the chat, let us know how helpful this was as a tool that you might be able to employ for not only your team management situation, but for you to be able to step into solo paddling with more confidence and grow that area of sense of adventure. Find the chat. Let us know how helpful this was. And also, if you have any questions for Matt, please put those in. Love to hear from you on this one. Matt, anything else you'd offer in a closing comment?
No, I just, I really appreciate this kind of environment. I'll say that one of the fantastic things that's been about my relationship and ability to work with TRAK and the whole team there is the real focus on these communities. And so, our ability to gather together and just chat, and, a bunch of experienced people have a fantastic, opportunity to kind of get excited about what we do and continue to do. So just really a neat environment. It's fun.